Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Welcome once again to our live Astros-Rangers Game 7 postgame show. I'm sorry for the calmer tone. This is going to be more of a funeral, I think, but I wanted to thank everybody for checking in with us, the best Houston sports podcast. We've been around for 10 years. I hope you've enjoyed our Astros postgame shows. And Robert with Stephen Kerr, he's with me in the other window over here, and 70 years of sports journalism between the two of us, over 100 years between the two of us as Astros fans. So, Stephen, we've seen all the disappointments over the years, haven't we?
Yeah, we've seen the triumphs and the disappointments, Robert. And, we were just watching, at the end of the game, the Fox broadcast and, watching the Rangers celebrate. And I think I even said to you before we went on, well, that was us once, several, more than once. But I mean, at one time, that was the Astros who were celebrating on the field, either at home or in somebody else's ballpark. And, Robert, I mean, this is what happens in sports. You take the good with the bad. And look, the Astros had a very up and down season. And I think tonight's game epitomized the weaknesses that kind of reared their ugly heads off and on throughout the season. The pitching was erratic. The hitting was erratic. And the Rangers just came out and exposed pretty much all those weaknesses in this series. Despite that, the Astros still had chances to win this series. I mean, more than ample opportunity to take it, and they just didn't.
Yeah, it's sad because of what you left on the table, and you were so close at times. And we're going to get to some comments, and please comment. I see you, Eddie, over there, and we'll get to you in a bit.
Hey,
but look, ladies and gentlemen, it is easy to be a little heartbroken after this, but what if I told you before the season started that you wouldn't have Lance McCullers or Luis Garcia all year long? You wouldn't have Jose Urquidy most of the year. Christian Javier would lose his fastball and look like a washed-up Dallas Keuchel with a 4+ ERA this year. Altuve would miss 72 games. Yordan would miss nearly 50. Hunter Brown would be awful for half the season. Ryan Stanek had a 9 ERA. The Astros would have spent most of the year behind the Texas Rangers, but in the end, they still beat the Rangers in the division. They still get to their 7th straight ALCS. Stephen, ladies and gentlemen, how would you feel if that's what happened after all of this?
Yeah, it'd be pretty hard to believe, wouldn't it? I mean, that's why you have to look at the positives. Of this team fights. They do not give up. I mean, even in the 9th inning, they were still trying to fight it out, being down 11-3. Altuve, he didn't give up. He hit a home run. That's what this team has done all year, Robert. It's been a next man up mentality. I know we use that term a lot, but that's what has to happen when you have so many injuries. And you were hoping that Michael Brantley would come back, and it didn't look like it for a long, long time. You finally get him back. But at the beginning of the season, he wasn't going to be a factor. So there were so many guys out that you really needed, that the fact that they won 90 games, and that's pretty much where I had them, Robert. I'll have to go back and listen to our Astros preview before we did the season, but I was picking them to win around 90 games, 88, 90, somewhere in there. And I also said they're not going to run away with the division, which they certainly didn't. They didn't even win it until on the very last day of the season. So, yeah, you factor all that in, it would be hard to believe that they would even get into the postseason, much less get to Game 7 of the ALCS. And listen, Robert, you and I both know, and I think most fans know, it is awfully, awfully difficult to get to the World Series 3 straight years, sometimes even 2 straight years. The Astros did that in 21 and 22, and they were on the cusp of doing it again this year, but it's awfully hard to do that. But they almost did it.
Brandy said she misses Lance McCullers. We all miss him, unless you liked his appearance when he ran out of the dugout during the Garcia fight. But Stephen, I've got a bunch of notes from early in this game, but really the only thing that matters, I'm throwing all my notes out pretty much. The
Yeah.
only thing that matters is Christian Javier. He gives up 2 hits on 100 fastballs in the postseason before this game. 2 hits on 100 fastballs. He gave up 3 in the first inning of this game. But this is really my key takeaway on Christian Javier. And Stephen, I'm going to go back to what I've said all year. He looks like he has a dead arm if there's no real injury. He needs rest after the short off season, I should say, last year, and that awful WBC that I insist devastated our entire starting pitching staff right after a very long regular season. I've talked about this endlessly since the start of the year. Javier had 2 great starts in the playoffs after what? After what, I ask you? A long rest? That was what happened. He had a long rest. But tonight, Stephen, he was back on regular rest, and that was the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Javier, I mean, you could say the dead arm, and, but because it was obvious he just didn't have command at all. I mean, he only threw 23 pitches, and I didn't see the exact number. I know at one time when he was at 17 pitches, he had 10 balls and 7 strikes. But, that was really the story of the first few innings, Robert. The Astros pitchers they could not find the strike zone, even if it was as big as the Minute Maid scoreboard. Yeah, there were some calls on the outer edges, and you know how these umpires are. They call some of them balls and some of them strikes, but they just had no command. And Javier, it just looked like his arm was completely done, or, that he was completely done. But you just wouldn't have imagined it the way he was pitching in the postseason. So, yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. You have to think, well, he's certainly going to get his rest during the offseason now.
Yeah, the other games in the postseason, like I said, he got a long, long rest. And Eddie says, what a disaster. I knew it was over when Javi couldn't get out of the first. Then instead of keeping it close, France implodes with Dusty just sitting there. And of course, no offense at home again. But was Dusty really sitting there? What did Dusty have? Let's go over this for a second. Dusty loses Javier after 1 out. He brings in Phil Maton to get out of the jam. And then what does he have left? Dusty was forced to throw out 2 rookie pitchers, and he brought in other guys. But both of those guys have tired arms. It's the biggest pitch load that they've had in any year of their entire existence. You can't throw out a 40-year-old Justin Verlander to go multiple innings after he just pitched 3 days ago. You risk ruining your ace, who's probably the only pitcher you can now count on next season right now. We don't know what we're getting from Javier anymore. We don't know what we're getting from Framber anymore. Garcia's coming off of an injury. McCullers is coming off an injury. Urquidy's coming off an injury. I mean, France and Hunter Brown are, they're just getting started. We have no idea. Urquidy stunk in his only appearance in this series. So do you bring him out? No. Why? What's the point of that? Bottom line is the Javier disaster screwed Dusty. He couldn't do anything about this. There's other things we can talk about, but not that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we even said, Robert, so go the Astros in Game 7. So go Javier, so goes the Astros in Game 7. I think we were convinced if Javier gave us a good performance tonight, that the Astros had a chance to win, and he didn't. And, to kind of emphasize what you were saying about a tired arm and things like that, even this postseason, you didn't get Javier beyond 5 innings. I think you had 5 in a third and 1, and maybe 5 in the other. Before tonight, so you couldn't even really stretch him out very much because he just started fatiguing out, is what it appeared. So that is the thing. But yeah, so goes Javier, so go the Astros in this game, and that's pretty much what happened.
All right, next thing. If there is a big Dusty gripe, if there is one in this series, and I'll say this is a gripe for me anyway, it was the strange decision we talked about last postgame when Dusty used Singleton with the bases loaded instead of Yanner or Chaz. And if you have a gripe about Dusty in the postseason, To me, that's the one. And Stephen, we've heard a couple of quotes from Dana Brown, which sound like he's not exactly on the same page as Dusty all the time. The biggest question this offseason isn't re-signing Maldi or Brantley or Neris. It's that relationship. It's the relationship between Dana and Dusty and what happens there the rest of the way. And the other thing about this, Stephen, is what I will point out to people that just like jump on Dusty, like this is the easy thing to do. Stephen, you just said it. The Astros went under Dusty to the 7th game of the ALCS, the World Series. They won a championship, winning in that season 11-2 in the postseason, 11-2. And then we just went over all the stuff that the Astros went through here this year, still getting to the 7th game of the ALCS. You can go, I hate this Dusty decision, I hate that Dusty decision. But bottom line is, you can't hate the results. You can't hate what happens. You're not going to win the World Series every year, especially when you're beset by injury after injury after injury. And what he did in during the pandemic was ridiculous. I mean, they were terrible that year, and they still almost got to the World Series.
Yeah, no doubt. And listen, when you have the kind of adversity that a team like the Astros have had, that's where you find out whether you're a great manager or not. I mean, you can put the most talented team on the field, and that doesn't necessarily mean you'll win the World Series every year. But chances are, it's a lot easier to manage a team that has all the pieces in place than it is when a bunch of your pieces are missing because of injuries. And you've got to hand it to Dusty. I mean, the guy's a winner. He's a winner. Okay, he's only won World Series and several times that he's been there. He hasn't won a Game 7. He's now 0-4. But come on, the guy is still a winner. He can still take a team to get to a point. And, after that, really, it's up to the players. And I can't really fault Dusty for any decisions, especially this postseason. A couple of minor ones like you talked about. Maybe he could have pulled France a little sooner and put Neris in, but would that have really made a difference in this game? I don't think so. So you got to hand it to Dusty, not only for this season, but he did what Jim Crane brought him in to do. First and foremost was to calm the atmosphere right after the cheating scandal happened. They needed a calm, steadying presence, a change in the culture, or at least a steadying of the culture. Dusty did that. He absolutely did that. And they had an extra few playoff spots during the pandemic year. Otherwise, the Astros wouldn't have made it. But so what? They got there, and they almost got to the World Series again. So I absolutely cannot say that Dusty is the reason that we didn't get back to the World Series this year.
The other part about all of this with Dusty is be careful what you wish for, because look at what happened to the teams that Dusty managed after they got rid of him. One team after another have fallen apart as soon as they got rid of him. And you could say, well, maybe that's the end of the window. Maybe that's the argument there. And the window might be ending for the Astros, because let's be honest with all this, Stephen. Look at what we got going on the next year or two. Altuve and Bregman, this is their last year. Yeah. The starting pitching staff looks to be in big trouble if Framber or Christian Javier don't get it turned around on a regular basis next year. I'm talking about they need to go back to the Framber and Javier that we saw before. Because I don't know if Lance McCullers, you can never count on him, period.
No.
And Luis Garcia, who knows? I mean, and he's a 4th or 5th starter, probably at best. So to keep this window open, Framber and Javier, you thought were the hope for this window to be going forward for the next few years, because you knew you were losing Altuve and you knew you're losing Bregman, most likely, those two guys. So, and potentially a couple of years down the road, Kyle Tucker. Right now, I know all you want to take Kyle Tucker and throw him in the trash can, and we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, Stephen, I mean, that's the key here is, be careful what you wish for with Dusty Baker, because this is what happens after teams get rid of him.
Well, that's right. I mean, you go down the list, the Giants, the Reds, the Nationals, the Cubs. Weren't they the 4 other teams that Dusty managed before? And I might be missing one, but those were the teams. And every single one of them basically went off the map for a good while. Yeah, some of them came back, but it was quite some time later. But Robert, I mean, as I said, I've been thinking about this for a while, even before this series and, just throughout the season. And I really am not confident that Dusty is going to be back next year, whether it's his decision or Dana Brown and Jim Crane's decision. I mean, you think about it, he's 74 years old. And as you said, he and Dana Brown haven't, some of the comments Dana Brown has made about the lineup, throughout the season, talking about putting Chas McCormick in more often, Yanner Diaz should be getting more playing time. That's kind of a telling sign that they're not on the same page, as you said. And this is, Dana Brown's he's completed his first full season with the team now. So it may be, especially with the front office shakeups that, have gone on behind the scenes, it could be that Dana Brown is ready to bring his own person in as the manager next year. It very well could happen, and it would not surprise me if it did.
Yeah, here's the other part of this whole equation with the Astros is, it was Jim Crane that was so big a Dusty fan. And Dana Brown was a guy that he's hired, though, and he trusts. And so really the conversation between Jim Crane and Dana Brown is going to be very interesting because Dusty's an old school guy. Jim Crane is an old, he was talking about, I'm an old school guy. He likes some of the old school stuff, although, he had all those years with Jeff Luhnow. But, it's where do you go? Because Dana Brown, I don't think he's like, just as analytical as Jeff Luhnow, but I also believe that he sees some of the flaws in some of Dusty's logic. I mean, just the whole argument to come out with the I'm going to go back to the John Singleton thing for a second, Stephen. His argument after the game was that John Singleton was a lefty and the pitcher had so little success against lefties. The problem with that is when you have a lefty up there that can't hit Major League Baseball pitching, he's got years and years of, we've experienced this enough to know that John Singleton just isn't good enough. There's holes in John Singleton's swing that just aren't good enough. As good as his eye is at the plate, it's really good, but it doesn't work if you can't hit the mistakes once you get them. And
that's right. And he wasn't. And the thing was early in the season, it contradicts something he said early in the season. This is where Dusty gets himself in trouble, is he contradicts himself. It doesn't make any sense. His arguments are never that good. He said, earlier this season, he said Yanner can't hit lefties because he was hitting about 950 or whatever against righties with an OPS. Well, if he's so good against righties and he can't hit lefties, then why aren't you throwing him out there against a righty instead of John Singleton? A righty would have been perfect for him because you said it. He hit righties great this year. And I don't remember what he finished with, but I know his numbers were really good against right-hand pitching. So, some of Dusty's logic doesn't hold water a lot of times, and his excuses don't hold water. And in a time where we're judging this by, are you paying attention to what's going on with these guys? And there's times where you just feel like Dusty doesn't. And it's a lot of times it's the old, it's in his own way. Remember Jimmy Williams used to say manager's decision. That's what Dusty does a little bit too much. Stephen. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess if you want to point one finger at Dusty, it would be the big picture types of things like what you're talking about. And, numbers are a good thing and a bad thing. They can help you and they can hurt you. Well, the numbers don't lie with John Singleton. He's had so many chances, several chances with the Astros. He's had 2 chances with the Astros. He's had chances with other major league teams. And I know he had some problems some years ago with drugs and things like that got him out of the league. And, he's tried to come back and it's a great story. But the fact is he's gotten chances to make it in the major leagues and he's just not cutting it. So, those numbers just don't add up. So there has to be a human element in there somewhere, regardless of how many analytics you go to. There's room for both. And sometimes I don't think Dusty gets both or is able to use both effectively.
Yeah. And I got to just go back to the series for a second because, people have talked about Tucker and Pena and it's worth noting Kyle Tucker was 6 for 40 in the postseason. Jeremy Pena, 1 extra base hit, 42 plate appearances. Not good, although incredible defensively. And we should not forget that. And you can't, in the old days, you would just say, hey, that's good enough for a shortstop. Maybe these days it's not good enough, but still, Jeremy Pena, to me, was not the problem for the Astros. And maybe you're sad that you didn't get more from Tucker and Pena at the plate, but instead, we got to take a second here. And we got to remember that we just saw one of the most historic, one of the most surreal postseasons from any hitter that's ever lived in baseball history. Yordan Alvarez hit 465 with a 1.487 OPS, 1487 OPS. In 11 games, he was on base. This is 11 postseason. This isn't just the Rangers series. This is the whole postseason.
Yeah.
In 11 games, he was on base 25 times. Okay. He had 6 homers, 6 doubles, and a triple. And let me repeat, Stephen, 1487 in 11 games.
That's huge. Man, that's huge. I was telling my wife tonight, I said, you know what? I'm so glad that this guy is on our team because I sure would hate to face him. I mean, who in their right mind wants to face Yordan Alvarez if he's not on your team? So we can thank our lucky stars, Astros fans, that he is on our team and will be for several years to come. Because, what this guy's done, not just this postseason, but, he's look at what he did last year in the postseason, the walk-off homers, the big hits, and the number of hits that he's had. I mean, this guy's doing it multiple years, and he's battled through some injuries. Yeah, as you said, he was out when he missed 50 games this past year. But man, when he's healthy, he just is absolutely crushing it. So, what more can you say about Yordan Alvarez except I'm just so glad he's on our team and not somebody else's.
I'm not sure what else to say about Minute Maid Park, but I guess we need to bring in some priests and have an exorcism.
Yeah, I guess, if there was an answer, Robert, somebody would have already figured it out and you'd be doing something about it. I mean, I think it's one of those seasons, hopefully it's just a season thing, but I don't know. It is the most curious thing I have ever seen that, you've got all you needed to do, Robert, if you won 3 games on the road, all you needed to do is win 1 game at home, 1 game in 4 tries, and you can't do it. You got down 2-0. You went to Arlington. You went back up 3-2. You come home. You have 2 chances. You blow them both. That is just absolutely it's not unheard of because, I mean, it happened in 2019 in the World Series with the Nationals. Same thing. You're up 3-2. You got 2 chances. You lose both games and you lose the World Series. So I just throw up my hands. I don't know what to say about the Minute Maid Park thing, except, God, I hope it's just a seasonal thing. And next year they'll just come back and play better at home.
Yeah, the 40-47 record, I don't think will ever make sense this year. And I guess what's so frustrating if you're an Astros fan is for this to happen twice in a 4-year span where you lose all 4 games at home and win all 3 games on the road. And one of those was in a World Series where you were the prohibitive favorite. Mm-hmm. And the other was against that hated I-45 rival Texas Rangers.
Yeah, I think that's what, for a lot of Astros fans, that's what really stings probably more than anything is you just lost to a Dallas team or, Dallas area team, I guess, in this case. So that just makes it even worse, I guess. And I don't know. I'd like to find out, now that the Rangers are in the World Series, are you going to cheer for them or are you going to root against them for either the Diamondbacks or the Phillies, whoever gets in after they play their Game 7? I'd be curious to know. So put that in the comments too. Are you going to cheer for the Rangers now that they're in the World Series after they just beat your Houston Astros? You know what, Robert? I'm not. Go Diamondbacks, go Phillies. I'm not cheering for the Rangers. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, the other thing is I would love to know, put in the comments, would you rather lose to the Rangers like this? Or would you rather lose to the Yankees or the Red Sox? Like what? Put them in order: Yankees, Red Sox, Rangers. Which three teams that you would most or least like to lose to?
Well, I could just say, as far as the Red Sox and the Yankees, we've beaten those teams before in the postseason, even in ALCS play. So, yeah, you still don't want to lose to them, but I think it would sting much less to lose to either one of those teams than it is the Rangers, just because they are the Rangers and in just the fashion that they lost. I think combining those things, it just stings a little extra.
Yeah, here's what Kyle said. He said, at least we get a discount on Framber and Tucker. It's not a discount, really. It's basically it's basically that they're still in arbitration. So there's
Right.
no discount at this point.
Right. Well, and even if it is a discount, I mean, they're still not being effective. They're still in your lineup. They're still in your rotation, and they're not doing the job. So, but I think, gosh, I have more confidence in Tucker. I definitely think he's going to be okay. Now, Framber has always been the biggest question is, can he, and I said this the other day on the podcast, can he get the emotion out of his pitching and work more on mechanics and focus? And, we can talk about the pitch clock affecting him and the fact that he doesn't have the time to walk around the mound and take deep breaths and, get himself together for the next pitch. But you know what? You've got to adapt. This is the way the game's going to be. It's not going to change now. The pitch clock is here to stay. So if it was that, you got to get rid of it. You've got to figure it out.
Was there anything that we didn't talk about specifically in the game, Stephen, that you wanted to bring up? Because I didn't go much into it because it just felt like it wasn't worth getting into that mess because there was nothing real good.
No, really not. And I mean, I have to say, Robert, even when it was 4-2 and the Astros were still down by 2 runs, I didn't feel good about it. I just didn't feel like they could come back. Normally they could. The bats are certainly capable of it. But with the way that the pitching just collapsed and the hitters having chances in both of these games and even in the first 2 games of the series at home, even at 4-2, I just said, this isn't going to happen. I just don't feel it. And then, when it got to 7-2, 8-2, I was like, well, no, it's just not.
The other thing that's worth mentioning about Dusty that I didn't mention earlier, there is no competition now. Bruce Bochy is a much better manager than Dusty Baker. Bruce Bochy is a top-tier Hall of Fame manager. He has never lost a Game 7. Dusty has never won a Game 7 in the playoffs. And Bruce Bochy, what he has done with this franchise, taken them, they talked about it on the broadcast, but it's worth repeating. They had 100 losses. They had, 90 losses, 90-something losses last year.
Pretty close.
And to go all the way to the World Series. And that team they couldn't get anything together. We watched it, Stephen. They weren't even close to competing with the Astros the last couple of years. It wasn't like, it wasn't like, we just barely beat out the Rangers the last couple of years. And they added some pitching, but we also have to remember that pitching was hurt. Some of those key arms.
Yeah.
And even, we didn't see DeGrom. Max Scherzer wasn't Max Scherzer. So
Syndergaard. You didn't see Syndergaard. And yeah, even when they traded for Scherzer, he pitched a couple of games and then he went out with the injuries and he did come back for the postseason. But yeah, getting back to Bruce Bochy, just to emphasize that point, he is now the first manager in baseball history to take 3 different teams to an LCS. And you think about that. He did it with the Padres. He did it with the Giants. Now he's done it with the Rangers. So you can unequivocally say that Bruce Bochy is one of the best managers in baseball, period. Not just the fact that he's got a better record than Dusty in the postseason.
And we have to mention Garcia because he was so much a part of this series and just an unreal night. I mean, he just keeps hitting around the Astros. And the only thing that I was really frustrated with as far as pitch selection tonight was Hunter Brown threw a fastball on the outside that he hit opposite field. And he was hitting opposite field home runs against the Astros all the time. And especially against it was mostly fastballs that he was hitting against the Astros. he got a base hit later in the game off of a curveball, but frankly, if he gets a curveball or he gets a slider or something like that, and he does something with it, I'm fine. I just was not a big fan of giving a pitch that he could really just, straight fastball outside. It gives him a chance to extend his arms. And he showed over and over again that when he did that, he was killing him.
Yeah, when you see a lot of great hitters, if they can extend their arms in a pitch, they're going to hit it. And yeah, that was disappointing. And I think that especially stung because of the fact that, he was the reason that Brian Abreu got suspended. And thankfully, if MLB got anything right, which they really didn't in this whole situation, at least they got it right to let him finish out the postseason and serve it next year. But yeah, Garcia, you have to say he came to play in this series, like it or not, and just had an unbelievable night in Game 7. And even in Game 6, he struck out 4 times. And yeah, his grand slam, it wasn't the difference in the game, but it certainly was an exclamation point. And I guess it set him up to come back in Game 7 and do it some more.
Let me ask you this, Stephen, and I know this is a hard question, but how much money would you pay? What would be the most money that you would pay to bring Brantley back next year?
What did he make this? It was a 1-year deal this year, and I don't remember.
11 or 12, I think,
11 or 12.
This year.
Well, I certainly wouldn't bring him back for more than that in a 1-year deal, despite the fact that, I know his bat is valuable, but you still have to think, he is older and the injuries are definitely cropping up. You didn't even get him. What did he play? 15 regular season games?
I don't know how you can give a guy $12 million on the
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think you can do that.
He can't play back-to-back yet after 14 months. To me, I wouldn't spend more than like $2 or $3 million.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't bring him on that again this year. You've got to do it much less if you're going to bring him back at all. Because not only that, if he does play a great deal, most of the time he's probably going to be a DH and not a fielder. He's played some, but I'm sure he will not if he comes back. So no, I would not give him the same deal I gave him this year. And, let's think about this. Hector Neris, he has a player option. It's doubtful that he's going to exercise it. So that means he's probably going to enter free agency. He's going to want big money. You're already paying Rafael Montero, an ungodly sum. And he finally got it together toward the end. But, are you wanting to pay Neris the kind of money he's probably going to be seeking? I don't know. Phil Maton, he's going to be a free agent too. So Stanek, I definitely don't think that Stanek is coming back. So yeah, those are a lot of questions.
I don't see Phil Maton getting a big. You could get him on something that was low. He's not a back of the bullpen guy. So
no,
unless he asks for something exorbitant, I think you could bring Phil Maton back at something very reasonable. Neris is going to be difficult. There's a fine line of what are you willing to pay. Dana is not going to do the dumb stuff like, handing out $30 million like they did to Montero the last offseason. Brian says Rangers, Yankees, Red Sox, and I assume Brian means he would least like to lose to the Rangers and then the Yankees and then the Red Sox. I assume the Sox would be last. So he's saying,
I think I'm with you, Brian.
He's saying it's easier to lose to the Yankees than the Rangers. So,
that's kind of what I said. We've beaten the Yankees, multiple times in the postseason. So, they're going to be due for one. And it just wouldn't hurt as much to me as losing to the Rangers.
Yeah, at this point, it wouldn't hurt as much. Yeah, because you've done the damage against them. And right now, there's just very little in the Rangers-Astros postseason. There is nothing except this in the Rangers-Astros postseason rivalry. So, I don't know. I just don't like the Yankee fans a lot more than I don't like the Ranger fans.
I don't blame you. I'd certainly be with you there. But, getting back to the, Maton and some of these others, really, he may be, out of those guys we just named, he may be the only one who does come back. Realistically speaking.
True. And, then there's Maldonado. And that's another thing where I feel like Dusty and Dana Brown are going to have a big, heavy conversation. And he's going to say something like, all right, we can bring Maldi back, but I'm telling you right now, and this is going to, I know you're the manager and all this, but I'm telling you right now, we'll bring Maldi back. He's going to be the catching 2 games a week, and that's it. And if that's an issue, and if you start trying to play him more, then I'm trading him. I'm getting rid of him, So, or I'm just releasing him, but I'm not letting you do that. And, this is not necessarily just disrespect to Martin Maldonado. He's going to be 37 years old. And at some point, Yonner has to learn how to do the same things Molly does. And you can't learn it by sitting there in the dugout all the time.
If you think about it, it's pretty remarkable at his age that Martin Maldonado is catching as much as he is, Robert. Most catchers, that is a tough position when you're crouching behind the plate game after game after game, 100 of games a year, playoffs, the whole thing. The fact that Martin Maldonado is 37 and catching as many games as he is, it's pretty remarkable. But yeah, come on, you've got to find out if Diaz is your guy or not, and you're not going to find out, playing Maldonado 120, 130 games, whatever it was a year, for the most part. I think catcher is definitely something the Astros need to look at, because even if you put Diaz behind the plate as your starter, you got to have another veteran, I think, in there to alternate, and even put Diaz at some of the other positions like you would have done this year, because I'm just not sure I'm not sure that he is ready, maybe from a hitting standpoint, but handling the pitchers, that is a big deal. And you're talking about not just, the Verlanders and those types of guys, but the guys like Fromber, who you never know whether they're going to go off, get totally emotional and just get lit up. You've got to handle all that stuff. And I'm not sure Yonner Diaz is quite ready for that, but you got to find out. And the only way to find out is to play him.
The other thing that I think about and might be a subject of conversation is, do you trade Kyle Tucker while he's got 2 years left in arbitration, where you can get a lot back? And this Astros farm system, we know it needs some work. But I think the thing, Stephen, that's going to prevent them from doing that is that they just gave away 2 of their best young outfield prospects. And this next year, it might be the beginning of the end, because, no Altuve or Bregman potentially after this year, and no Verlander. So, those 3 guys could all be gone at the end of this next coming year. So it might be the last time that you can make a run. And I hate to say it, but, that's where I am right now with this Astros team, because, they do what they do because of guys like Altuve and Bregman and Verlander and the leadership that those guys provide. And the other thing about it, Stephen, is it's just depth. You could say, well, we still have Yordan and we still have Kyle Tucker, but they make it so much easier depth wise over the course of a long season. And then what they do for you in the playoffs, as we know, is just beyond the beyond. And let's just remind everybody that it wasn't like Altuve and Bregman weren't big in these playoffs. We know what Altuve did with the home run, but overall, he hit 295 with a 945 OPS.
Yeah.
And this is his 12th season. So let's not forget that. Alex Bregman, he only hit 220, but he had a 932 OPS. He had 4 homers, a triple, and a double. So he was getting it done, and Altuve was getting it done. I'm sorry, Altuve, my mistake. 286 with a 906 OPS. The other number was Jose Abreu, 295 with a 945. So both of those, they were pretty close in what they were doing, the 2 Jose's. But yeah, Stephen, it's so important. So I don't see them trading Kyle Tucker.
I don't think you're going to see it that soon. You're certainly not going to see it over this winter. And I think a lot of it will just depend on, who will you get in free agency? You're going to bring in a quality outfielder, and, there may be 1 or 2 guys in your system that could possibly surprise you. But I think it also depends, what do the Astros do next year record-wise? If there's not in the pennant race somehow by the trade deadline, then maybe you think about it. But, Robert, at some point, I think we all know this all goes in phases. Altuve's going to be gone. Bregman's going to be gone. These guys, the window always closes at some point. So it's all going to depend on when that starts to happen as to whether, okay, it's time to trade Kyle Tucker, get a couple great prospects, hope they pan out in a couple of years, do some things in free agency and try to at least hang in there. But it's going to be awfully difficult to do over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of the other big picture questions, but while I'm trying to remember that, it's also important to note this doesn't hurt as much as it did in previous years because you're coming off a championship. The Texans look like a real NFL franchise again. And if you didn't listen to it, go back and listen to our show a few days ago, me and Sean talking about the potential of the Texans in the playoffs, which is a very real potential. In fact, it's practically 50-50 now in Vegas. And it doesn't hurt as much because the Rockets look like they could be a real team once again. And by the way, we will have a Texans preview of the Carolina Panthers on Wednesday night with me and Sean. And we're going to also speak to a Panthers insider, get a little behind the scenes on that. But Stephen, yeah, this one doesn't sting quite as much. I wasn't as heartbroken because there's other stuff in Houston sports going on that's fun and exciting right now.
Well, that's right. And I mean, doesn't it go back to what I just said about things going in phases? I mean, the Texans and the Rockets sucked over the last few years. The Astros were the team that were carrying the city of Houston. And listen, they could still be winning for the next 2 or 3 years. For all we know, all three teams could be in there. That'd be a great thing, Robert. I mean, I'm certainly not giving up hope on that. I'm trying to think positive, but yeah, you're right. I think what stings the most is it was to the Rangers. If it had been any other team, I think, except maybe the Yankees or Red Sox, like you said, I think it would probably sting even less. But you are right. I mean, we had so much to be proud of, even this season with all the ups and downs. But you're coming off a World Series championship. You have 2 now. You've been to 2 World Series in a row. So it's not like you haven't gone up to the well and gotten water. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
We'll wrap things up. And I just got to say thank you, everybody that's out there listening and watching watching our shows, and a little patient with me because you might be able to tell over the last few months, it's been a little bit more of a struggle for me to talk. I have been recovering from my jaw surgery, and I still don't have some feeling in my jaw and my lip. You'll see me if you're watching on YouTube. I'm doing all sorts of stuff with my face, and it's just me dealing with it's all that stuff that I'm kind of dealing with. So I just want to thank everybody for being patient. I want to thank Stephen, once again, because he's been such an incredible partner over these last few years with the Astros post games. I'm trying to remember. We go back now. Is this our 4th or 5th Astros post game together, Steve?
Well, I believe it's our 5th. I came to you in the summer of 2019. So, they were, so it'd be 5 in a row. That's right. We're on a streak of our own, Robert.
Yeah. So we'll keep doing this as long as the Astros, my plan is to keep on, as long as I've got a heartbeat, I'm going to keep trying to put shows out and do stuff, and hopefully my jaw is going to recover a little bit better, make it easier for me to talk.
No, certainly. We hope that too, Robert. And, you've been an inspiration to so many people just hanging in the way you do. This show is, it's obvious you're passionate about this show, and it shows, no pun intended, it shows every time out. And let me just say, I enjoy doing these. I mean, this is something I used to be a sports talk show host, but not in Houston, my hometown. So I never got to talk a whole lot about the Astros or the Rockets, or, the Texans weren't even around when I was in sports broadcasting. That's how long ago it was. So this is a dream for me that I get to talk a lot of Astros baseball and, occasionally, Texans and Rockets. So this is great for me. So I appreciate you letting me be here to talk Astros with you. And before we close, let me just say one thing. Keep your eyes on February 24th of 2024, because that will be the first spring training exhibition game against the Washington Nationals. And guess who the Astros are opening up with on March 28th, opening day at Maid Park? The New York Yankees. How about that? Speaking of the Yankees, you get the Yankees not only at home, but it's opening day weekend.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really cool. And Kyle, he put in his word, and he says, "Go Diamondbacks." He says he wants them to win the whole thing, and he truly believes Dusty will not be back next season. People will come to realize the good that Dusty brings to the table when he's gone. He's a good manager, more than a good manager. He's a great manager. Where is he in wins now, Steven? He's probably what, top eight all time?
At least he's climbing up the ladder. Yeah, and like top 8, top 7 now.
So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you for commenting. Throw some comments down in our other videos. Go check them out. If you like Houston sports history, I always recommend go to our Houston sports history playlist. And there are around 200 interviews that we've done over the years with legends in Houston sports history, Astros legends, Rockets. There's an Astros playlist just for Astros. If you're only an Astros fan, you can go to that. But Astros, Rockets, there's a Texans playlist. There's an Oilers playlist, a Houston Cougars playlist. There's all of that. And, it's one of my favorite parts of what we've done over the years. And I hope everybody out there gets to enjoy that a little bit and keeps up with, what's happened over the course of history and all the great things that have happened in Houston sports. Not just these last Astros few years, but they've been spectacular for sure. Thanks again. And we will talk to you again, I believe, on Wednesday. Me and Sean will be talking Texans and other things. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.